Good morning, everyone. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections. It's December 9th, 2021, 10 a.m. We have a lot of things to cover here in this meeting. Thank you. But the first thing that we need to do is call the meeting to order, which I'm now doing, and approve the agenda. Right now, what we have is we'll have public comment, then we're going to have old business, new business that would include our schedule, and residency challenge hearing, and then we will go into executive session if needed, and then adjourn. So, yes. Motion is made to approve the agenda, properly made and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. The agenda is approved. Okay, we're going to call people in the order in which I received the card, so I'm trying to do it in the order in which you came in the door, but if not, you will get your 2 minutes. You get up to 2 minutes to speak to us, and when your time is up, I would appreciate it if you would finish your sentence and allow someone else to speak. In the true spirit of the holiday season, I hope we'll all be positive and enjoy each other's company as we listen to the comments. Because we're in a different room, would somebody tell me where we want people to be when they actually come forward? Right here? Okay, there's a microphone right here. And so when you're speaking, if you need to, because they're wireless, if you need to pick up the microphone so that we can hear you clearly, please do so.
There's a podium.
Oh, there's a podium back there, and there's a microphone. Is that microphone working? Okay. All right, so we'll try to do this as quickly as we can, but let's just make sure everything's in order so you don't have to endure something. Good? Okay. The first speaker that I have registered is Mr. Earl Ferguson here to discuss the voter challenge. Mr. Ferguson, I understand you're the one bringing the challenge, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, we're going to have time to listen to you separately in some detail, so if you don't mind yielding your position, I'll go on to the next speaker.
I yield.
Okay, thanks. And please forgive me if I pronounce names wrong, but Lucia Frazier? And please correct me if I got it wrong.
That's perfect.
Thanks.
Okay, hi. So I just have kind of a list of things I wanted to cover as far as some things that I saw in this last municipal election. And just in general, voter roll maintenance, I'd like to request that we get on top of that now. I have friends that are finding people that have voted from their address, even though they don't live there anymore. So they're finding the old names that are connected to their address, but they don't live there and they've been voting in that name somehow. So cleaning up those would be great. Absentee ballot process is, I still see it as very insecure. I do appreciate that the drop boxes were in the locations. That helped a lot. But if somebody, wants to drop 20, 30 ballots in, it's going to go unchallenged. So maybe you need some better training or some better ways for people to challenge that, so your workers don't feel that they need a process to push back on that sort of thing. So the last item I wanted to cover is I'd love to have a process diagram on how our elections work. I kind of looked all over the website to see, I couldn't find anything. So it would be great to have some sort of a process flow diagram of how a ballot travels from the voter to the final count. So there's 3 ways, ballots travel, is through absentee vote, the early voting process, and then on election day. And election day is easy. I mean, that's kind of an easy travel process, but the absentee vote process is a little more tricky. One of the things I saw is that you allow people to drop off votes at 3 offices, and in one of those offices, somebody dropped off a ballot, and the lady at the desk took it and just put it in a cardboard box under her desk, and that doesn't seem secure to me. So that was at the North Fulton Center. So I think you should eliminate the offices and just have people drop them in the precincts where the boxes are, where there's people already watching. So I think the office is unnecessary.
Okay, thank you. All right, appreciate it. Next speaker is Julie Adams.
Hi.
Morning.
I am hopeful that this board hires a new director of elections, and for that matter, a new training manager, and replaces the guys that shredded the voter registration applications, and will focus on people that understand that our elections are dictated by Georgia laws. Maybe it would be helpful if all employees are required to read and be tested regularly on Georgia election laws. During our recent municipal elections, I witnessed a lack of understanding of our laws. None of the 8 drop boxes were labeled with the applicable SB 202 laws, listing who could drop off ballots for who. In fact, a poll manager told me that if I collected 200 ballots in the neighbors of that location, they would not have a problem with me putting these 200 ballots in their drop box. 2 employees at polling locations were hired to watch the drop boxes. They said that they didn't know what or if there were any laws about who could drop off ballots. 2 poll managers said that the process for emptying the boxes were to call Fulton County when the drop boxes were full. These frontline employees don't understand our election laws. This lack of understanding follows through to the management of our elections. According to SB 202, when the polls close, 2 couriers will pick up the ballots and transfer them immediately to management at the elections department. Our elections department management, in their wisdom, decided that the next day was good enough and immediate enough to accept and secure these ballots. 7 of our 8 drop boxes averaged receiving 200 drop box ballots, except for the Buckhead Library. This location had a drop box in a separate room than the voting by the exit door.
Ms. Adams, your time is up.
The employee that was hired to watch this box was unaware of any drop box laws.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, Sandra Burkhardt. And again, please forgive me and correct me.
Thank you. My name is Sandra Burkhardt. I'm a Fulton County resident, and I'm extremely disappointed in what I have seen go on and continues to go on. My husband and I were poll watchers, had the privilege of watching things, and it was entertaining and amusing to see the number of people that have to staff all these places and the number of hours that are required, 5 o'clock in the morning until maybe 8 o'clock, or if you're in the city of Atlanta, after 8 o'clock. I just don't understand why the system is set up the way it is. There is a production of equipment that has to be delivered for this last municipal election that was just beyond reason. The number of stations set up, I don't know how you figure it out, but something's wrong when you send that many pieces of equipment out when it's not necessary for a Fulton County municipal election. I'd like to see passages explored so that things can be done in a way that matters, in a way that uses our tax money efficiently and not overstaff or over-equip unnecessary spots. Thank you.
Thank you. David Baker.
Madam Chair, my comments, if any, would be reserved for Mr. Ferguson's residency challenge.
We won't hear your comments. We would only be speaking with Mr. Ferguson,
Okay,
so.
very, very well then.
Is that good? Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Janice Johnston.
So the last election, Happy Faces, TDC, additional consulting expenses that was really just more money for Happy Faces. The emergency appointment of partisan activist Woolard as nonpartisan chair of this board. Poll watchers turned away. Allegations that candidates' names were not on the Dominion touchscreens. Hundreds of voters turned away at the polls. Every county in the state gets the vote results announced except one. Guess which one? And the counts still don't match. This was just a 20% turnout election. Voter disenfranchisement, voter suppression, meddling and interference by commissioners. Who tells them temporary poll worker employees to break a rule not follow company policy, and then threatens them with dismissal and financial punishment if they don't obey, what right does that person have? Isn't there a law against that kind of behavior? And the worst thing of all is he controls the Fulton Election Board. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Jeff Della Maggioria. And again, please forgive me if I've mispronounced your name.
I'm used to it. Thank you. Good morning. My name's Jeff Della Maggioria, and it's universally agreed that the highest probability of failure in election is with mail-in ballots. And as a past poll worker and interviewing several other poll workers and poll watchers, we heard a consistent, even after SB 202, we heard a consistent sentiment that folks were coming in with not a reasonable amount of ballots, like 3 or 4 for their family members and those kinds of things, but it was quite frequently observed where 20, 30, who knows, big stacks of ballots were put in. And so at that point, when the poll manager was approached to say, you know, this doesn't look right, what's going on, and a lot of shoulder shrugging. So with mail-in ballots being such a universally agreed upon point of failure or potential point of failure, I think, as one other mentioned, it's critical that our poll workers and poll managers have the strength and the courage and also the tenacity to go ahead and challenge folks that are trying to put in more than literally 2 or 3 ballots. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our public comment. Thank you all for speaking. Mr. Baker, are you sure you don't want to speak? You signed up for the time. You're welcome to. Okay, thanks. Okay, now we're going to move on to old business. We have quite a few minutes to approve. Does anybody have any corrections or changes to the minutes? Yes, Mr. Wingate.
Madam Chair, I only bring to your attention simply because it's scanning through the November 8th general regular meeting. As I recall, I had conversed with some of the staff during that meeting, and according to the minutes, I have nothing is stated about any of my comments and any responses. Just a point to be taken forward, okay? Not to be argued.
Is there anything that you'd like to have noted that was discussed that didn't make it into that?
If I can remember back that far. No, but, you know, I wouldn't mind, you know, if we listen to the transcript, it would clearly jog my memory, so maybe Arlene can get that to me in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. Maybe what I would suggest, you know, Arlene, if you wouldn't mind just reviewing that and see if you can bring amendments maybe to the next meeting? Would that be good?
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine, perfect.
Thank you on that one. Any other comments? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve all of the minutes as contained in our packet here?
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. The minutes are approved. Mr. Barron, would you like to give us the monthly operations report for November?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We conducted the November 30th runoff special election with 184 polling locations. No major problems were identified, and after action plan is being drafted in an effort to identify any problems and improvements to be implemented in 2022. Equipment pickup will continue until this Friday. Staff is currently completing post-election supply sorting, inventory, and reconciliation. Polling location changes for 2022 are being identified with plans to present change proposals to BRE at the first 2022 board meeting. We also anticipate sending the board a list of the early voting locations for the May election ahead of January. I would expect that those would be to you this week. We'll send those in the email, and then you can be prepared to approve the early voting locations in January, I guess pending any changes from redistricting that could occur. We used 7 of our 9 check-in locations for the November 30th elections. We had no major problems reported during check-in. Advanced voting operated without any major issues. The election, as I stated in the last 2 meetings, ran smoothly. Absentee ballot drop boxes were decreased to 5 locations for the runoff election from 8 in the November 2nd election. Voter registration, we have received 90,728 applications in 2021, and we received 7,048 voter applications in November. We currently have 846,978 registered voters in Fulton County. 753,039 of those are active. 93,939 are inactive. The state notified us yesterday that they are going to be doing another NCOA, National Change of Address mailing, later this month. They didn't give us a date, but I'm going to request that the state, today I'm going to send an email requesting that the state notify us of these things, because we didn't, it's not in our budget to have another NCOA meeting or NCOA mailing towards the end of the fiscal year. So we'll be able to find the funds, but I think the SOS needs to be more transparent about when they're going to do these mailings so that we can budget for them every year, and also we know when we have to put money on the postage meter and whether we have to transfer money from different line items to cover the expenses. So, and I think it would be good for all counties just to know when that type of voter list maintenance is going to happen from the state level, in addition to what we do on a daily or weekly basis. We will have a challenge hearing today. On Thursday, November 24th, the Board of Registration Elections received a challenge notice. The elector is challenging the residency status of 67 electors in Fulton County, and we are hearing that today. Voter registration was tasked with researching the residency, and that will be taken care of at the later agenda item today. The Secretary of State's office sent us a notice, or sent it to all 159 counties on November 22nd, that there was a recall application for the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. I think that's either the 3rd or 4th recall application this year. The petition only had 16 valid signatures from Fulton County, and we submitted a petition verification form on November 23rd to ensure compliance. I shared with the board some items that we proposed as enhancements to the Budget Commission, and for later, for the board to be able to go to the commissioners to talk to them about our budget requests for next year. We have 3 election, the Budget Commission is going to fund 3 elections as it stands right now: the general primary, the general election, the general runoff. I think the general runoff should be listed as the primary runoff. I'm not sure why the Budget Commission didn't fund the general primary runoff, because that's a runoff that's going to happen. So I would imagine they're going to have to add that to the budget, either that or shift the funds from the general runoff to the general primary runoff. Yes, yes. We did request some additional box trucks with lifts on them, some cargo vans, 2 passenger cars, and SUVs for mini deliveries and things that we have to do. Our 2 passenger cars are very old. We have not received status on those vehicle requests through the budget process. We requested 13 new positions, as several commissioners wanted us to reduce our reliance on supplemental staff, and it doesn't seem as though the Budget Commission recommended any new positions to the commissioners. Then we requested 13 new positions for next year. We also have requested things such as a new voting equipment, which the Budget Commission did not recommend to the commissioners. What we're trying to get away from is having to turn equipment over after early voting on the weekend between the end of early voting and on Election Day. For us to have to turn, our early voting program is larger than Cobb, Gwinnett, and DeKalb counties combined, and sometimes Clayton's as well. And we have to turn over all that equipment between the Friday before election, or the Friday when early voting starts, and get that out for delivery on the Monday before Election Day. And that is a huge undertaking that we didn't have to do with the previous voting system. And we need an inventory of Election Day equipment, early voting equipment, and then for training. We don't want to keep poaching training equipment towards the end to supply Election Day, and that's what we keep having to do election after election. So, and I supplied you with the amounts of, and it's a little over $3 million of equipment to make that happen. The voter education team spent the month of November cleaning up all old voter education contact files to ensure there is an accurate list in preparation for the 2022 elections. The VEO manager is collaborating with External Affairs, FGTV, and FGTV to develop collateral for the voter education outreach team to help enhance the department's brand and footprint. LaShondra Little, the VEO manager, has scheduled meetings with all the commissioners to understand their vision and needs from the voter education and outreach team. The VEO team has also been working with various Latin American organizations and groups to develop and implement voter education and outreach programs with the Hispanic community in Fulton County. And the Latin American Association has been the lead organization facilitating the meeting between the voter education office. They executed community and student engagement events in November, notably the Department of Juvenile Justice utilizing the mobile bus to assist voters with disabilities, and training seniors at QLS to educate them on the new absentee ballot process. They are, deputy registrar training is now underneath the voter education team. They are revamping and updating the training materials to begin training new deputy registrars starting in January 2022. And as we develop the 2022 VEO plan, we continuously will be building new community partnerships. Moving over to the absentee division on page 10, one of the things that that confused voters, and I think it's going to be even more so next year, so we have to do a very good job of educating the public, is that SB2, we used to be able to send out absentee ballot applications to seniors 65 and older and disabled voters so that they would be able, we would send out those applications at the beginning of the year so they could be on a rollover list. And many people in the municipal election that applied for an absentee ballot for the November general did not realize that they had to then again apply for the runoff in that period. So that is something that we're gonna have to educate the public on next year, because of course more people are gonna vote and a lot of people aren't gonna realize. The primary is an exception. If you apply for an absentee ballot for the primary, the runoff is included, but all the other elections, it is not included. I'm not sure why they made that allowance for the primary and not for the other elections, but the runoff is not included with an application to vote in one election unless it's the primary.
Oh, sorry. I would say that moving forward, the best message would be that everyone has to apply for an absentee ballot every election.
Yeah.
That way there's no confusion.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, because if we make,
you know, the primary is the only exception, but it's going to confuse voters, I think, to get out there and deliver the message that you don't have to do it for this election, but you have to do it for
all the
others.
others.
So
Thank you.
well, I think the absentee by mail statistics were for the November 2nd election, which, or I guess, no, this is for the November 30th elections, are also on page 11 that Mariska provided to you. I'll just go over some of the highlights. We processed 1,584 applications, and we received 1,195 ballots back. And so that was a pretty, and we accepted 1,172 of those. So we had a pretty good return rate for those absentee ballot applications for the runoff, even though we had just a few days to get them into the mail and get them back because of when early voting started, when we had to mail them. It was a really quick turnaround time. We had personnel assigned to the 5 drop boxes throughout the county that had been trained, and we updated forms provided for the completion. We received 316 absentee ballots through the drop boxes. The division is updating process and procedures to reflect the changes currently taking place within the department. We continue to add measures to ensure that all Fulton County voters have an efficient and effective experience in all aspects of the voting. The division will be required to complete a series of trainings from the Secretary of State's office in the months of December and January. Division will also complete a series of in-house trainings. The absentee manager and supervisor plan to restructure all personnel responsibilities to ensure that all tasks are evenly distributed. And that's all I have for the operations report. If you have any questions, either I can answer them or you can direct them to staff as well.
Why don't we just go around, start with Ms. Crawford, and just work our way this way and
Okay.
take questions.
My question is, so the total number of absentee ballots in the drop boxes for Fulton County was 360.
That was for the runoff election.
For the runoff
Yes,
election.
I think.
Okay. Do you recall how many were in the, for the general?
Do you remember? You can, I think Mariska thinks it's 2016.
Okay.
She'd have to refer, or,
That's fine. Close enough. Thank you.
Is that all your questions?
Yes, ma'am. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Mr. Wingate?
Director, on this roughly $3 million investment for new equipment, is that all BMDs?
that would be, yes, BMDs, which would also include the printers, the UPSs that come with those. We also need carriers for those to go with it, and so that actually increases the cost. The carriers, I think, are going to run somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 to house those. And then we also requested privacy screens in the budget. Those were not recommended to the commissioners either, and that was over $300,000 for those privacy screens. I know that in some of the meetings, at least one commissioner requested through our VEO manager that wondering why we didn't have privacy screens. So I think that's going to be something that some of the commissioners are going to want, and some voters want those on the screens as well.
We've talked about this before on a few occasions, but what's the likelihood of being able to be more analytic along the EV polls and the precinct polls to get a more accurate need in terms of equipment? And the prime example I'll give you that came up in this Muni election was APO 5, which is Creekview Elementary, right there at Windward. there were 20 BMDs stationed in there that day. And as I recall, I could be off a bit, but there's a little over 100 voters that came through that facility. And the reason I ask is because to me it's logical. If we have better analytics on how to distribute a more right amount of equipment, could we forego some of the new purchase?
For some of the, we have some flexibility in the law for some elections to reduce the equipment. Usually there is, for every 250 voters, we have to have one BMD.
Right.
And that would be for all of the major elections. And I don't know if Nadine wants to comment on it, but those quantities were based on that ratio.
Yes, for APO 5, there's over 4,000 people assigned to that precinct. So if we do we do the calculation at 250 per voter. That's why the machine count is so high. We can't predict who's going to show up, but we have to make sure the machines are there for them so we don't have long lines.
I understand. That's why my question is focused on prior results and those analytics. All I'm saying is that if the state law, which I was not familiar with, requires that we have 250 machines.
One machine for every 250
one machine
voters.
for every 250 voters. My assumption is, as we sit here right now, we have enough equipment to cover that ratio?
That's correct.
Okay, so we have enough on the books right now. If we're a little bit better in our analytics to figure out we don't need to send 20 machines to Creekview, as an example, would we be okay?
We can, for these smaller elections, we can make adjustments. For the big elections, we have to follow that. The thing that I think the legislators need to do is to account for how many people vote during early voting. I mean, we're in big elections getting 50 to 60% of the people voting before or during early voting, and then there's an additional percentage that vote by absentee. I mean, we had 88% of the voters who voted vote before Election Day in November 2020. So we didn't need all of that equipment out in the field, but we were required by law to have all of that out there.
And that's a different issue that would, I think, probably does need to be looked at. But along that same line, what would prevent us from closing early voting on Wednesday instead of Friday to give more days to make that transition?
We have to stay open through that Friday.
Have to.
Yeah,
Have no options.
yeah.
All right. So we're kind of stuck with the parameters of the 1 to 250, and we have to keep early voting open until Friday. It's good things for us to know and go back and talk to other people about. Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Question.
Is that okay with you?
Is that okay with you?
Yep, go ahead.
So the 50% number that you were referring to, most of the voters vote early, about 50% of the voters. Is that statewide or is that just Fulton County?
I'm unsure how early voting goes in the other counties, but for our big elections, like for the 2016 presidential, we had 59.1% vote early. For this election, it was like 60% voted early. We had 28% vote by mail in November 2020 as well, and so that's why it got up to 88%. I think a lot of counties had high numbers that voted before Election Day last year, just because of early voting, and absentee was of course, much greater percentage of that. But yeah, most of our voters vote before Election Day now.
Because to Mr. Wingate's point, it would make sense if there was a way, and I don't even know if this is possible, but if there was a way that we could look at, say, that particular precinct and see that over half of the people, if there was a number, a calculation that you can come up with and say, this many people voted from this precinct, which may require starting on Thursday as opposed to Friday, but then adjusting the number of machines. I don't even know if that's possible, but.
Well, we start logic and accuracy testing about, what is it, when do we start? A month? About 30 days for election day ahead of time. So we assign it based on that ratio. And the LNA starts for election day about a month before the election.
Okay.
So then we're preparing those machines. Going back in then and pulling them back is really would be very complicated. So we kind of have to prepare at some point just for there to be the onslaught on election day, whether people start getting picked off on during early voting. We're stuck with that. The only precincts we'd be able to make adjustments on would be if we don't have enough, if we have to turn over equipment, and some of those precincts that we're preparing on the weekend before, we could possibly make adjustments in some of those, but we would have to, the state would have to then say, yeah, it's okay to reduce those numbers, but I don't think we're going to get that exemption from them. And I don't know really that the SOS has the power to exempt us from that.
Can I piggyback also?
I just wanted to say that I also think, if we were to do that, we would run the risk of not having enough, machines and not being able, and having long lines, and we don't want to see that in a very important election and cycle in 2022, so.
Ms. Crawford?
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. My only question, my question is, you answered that we have enough equipment for all of our precincts. Does that include the equipment that we use for training?
We have enough equipment for what we need to do on election day. What we don't have enough equipment for is to avoid that turnover on the weekend. And that, what we do on the weekend before election day is all of that early voting equipment comes back. We also have to get the poll pads prepared. There's space that is needed to prepare those poll pads. There are also people that are required. If we have to turn over equipment on that weekend, we then have to, I lost my train of thought. We have to prepare all that equipment on election day. It takes space, and when we're doing the poll pads and also getting the supplies all laid out and ready for delivery for Sunday, we have to then hire more people to come in just on that weekend to work, to turn that equipment over and do the poll pads, which is something that we didn't have to do in prior, like with the previous voting system. So it's definitely complicating matters. And we actually borrowed some equipment from 2 counties to get us through this last election. And thankfully Douglas and DeKalb counties let us borrow some equipment.
If we were to be able to get the required equipment, you would not have to spend as much time on the flip from early vote to election.
We wouldn't have to turn over any equipment. We'd have separate inventories, and that's what our goal is.
Okay.
I think Terry might have, I think it's,
Right here, 550. Wait, that's the bag. That's the bag. BMD printer transport, that's a printer transport bag. Image cart, CBS power.
would say like ICX.
Yeah, about 650 BMDs.
There you go. Where is it? 650.
650 BMDs. And the carriers, we either need 2 station carriers or 4 station carriers to house those, so.
And what's the consensus so far on the approval of this, or where?
Well, the Budget Commission did not recommend any new equipment purchase at all, or privacy screens. Any of the requests we made, they did not.
Is there a plan to go back to them to make a case for supporting this?
We were given a hearing in October, and then we've provided them with the spreadsheets that we gave to you that showed what we need based on, to have those inventories. At this point, we don't have another opportunity to go, I mean, there's no, basically what I've asked is for the BRE to do that, to make those asks for us.
Well, I'm in support of making that ask. I think it's really important. We don't want to see, in some cases, you make a good point, when there's not enough time in between, there's only 3 or 4 days to get the equipment turned around for operational use on, for election day. And that's a small amount of time. You also run the risk of inaccuracies. So if, let's say, one of the BMDs is not properly, that was used for testing, in a testing environment, is then used in the election, there has been a couple of cases where the counts are off because it wasn't emptied. Am I making sense?
I think I understand what you
may not be using
mean.
the most accurate terminology, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think it also increases, if we have to bring in new people just to
The
help us on
workload,
that
yeah.
weekend, that increases the risk. And the way the warehouse is, it doesn't, since the election central will not be ready for the May election. I mean, that's just because of, they moved us to a different location, and because of supply chain and other things, the construction industry, the way it is, we aren't even sure if it's going to be ready for the November election. So we're going to be still in our warehouse. The number of BMDs and carriers actually that are in our warehouse on that weekend, if we have to turn the equipment over, affects the access points to download the bulk file into the poll pads. It affects, because the metal apparently in the carriers interferes with that transmission from our cash box to the poll pads, which that then lengthens the amount of time it takes. And the state requires us to put the statewide voter file on all of those poll pads. So it's a massive file that we have to put, and we're preparing over 1,000 poll pads, and you can only, Dominic can tell you about the exact process, but you have to find a sweet spot of how many precincts you need to set up in order for that bulk file to come down and make it as fast as it'll go. But I don't think other than this election, it's a minimum of 12 to 15 hours to do that bulk file onto the poll pads, and that doesn't even count some of the updates that we have to load before the poll pads are ready, that all the iOS updates that Apple sends us for the poll pads, which are actually iPads. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes. So, just like Rick said, we need the warehouse to be clear of all the equipment, because our carriers are metals. And when we have that in the room while we're doing poll pad weekend, we have signals bouncing off those metals. And for this last election, we were able to clear the warehouse, set up our precincts directly right under the access point. So because we had the room and we had like a plan of how to do things this time, we were able to finish up those poll pads in time. So going forward, if we have, and just like I was just going to add something to why we need those separate equipment for early voting and training, that will also help us in inventory. Because if we have separate equipment, then we know this equipment are just for early voting versus trying to flip them for election day, which Dr. Root said it gives room for different errors and accountability. So it's all about having a good number of equipment to work with, and also having the room, the space to work with.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, do you have a comment or questions? I'm sorry, we finished. Please go.
Well,
Continue.
We were finished with this, Mr. Johnson, did you have a question around what we're talking about? Okay. I did want to ask about the updated operating procedures on page 5 for voter registration division. And just if you could give me just an example of what SOPs were developed. I don't need all 19, but just a couple of examples of.
Oh, Shamira, do you remember the titles of any of the SOPs for voter registration?
And I guess more specifically, were there SOPs around, I guess the NCOA is one of those, or part of that?
The NCOA process was one of the SOPs that was created, in addition to processing DDS applications, paper applications, online. So, yes, we have a long list that we have.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And back to the budget, I forgot about the privacy screens. We've gotten so many, just another, I do support ordering, the privacy screens. We often get voters who feel like their vote was not cast privately, and I think it's really important if we can do that, and I do support ordering those privacy screens.
Yeah, at one point, the state said that they might purchase them and provide them, but we've heard nothing on that since August, so I'm not expecting us to get privacy screens from the state.
That's it.
Okay. Mr. Johnson? Okay. Mr. Wingate, did you have something else?
Just a brief follow-up. If I've done the arithmetic right here, if the commissioners would allow the inclusion of the new equipment you're requesting and the personnel, that's going to put 2022 budget a bit north of $50 million.
That's probably, let's see. Right now, the elections budgets are at 33 million. Brenda, do you remember what the operations budget is? But it's in the 3 to 4 million range. So that would put us up around 37 million, plus these budget requests would be, probably another 5 million. So, or 6. So,
They're not going to be able to ignore whatever budget's needed for the primary runoff.
well, right now, I mean, the only thing we can do would be to use the general runoff money for the primary runoff, and then hopefully there's no runoff for the general. I mean, we've only had one general runoff since I've been here in 8.5 years, and that was last year's Senate runoff. So I'm not sure how common that's going to be in the future to have general runoffs.
Well, if you have third-party candidates,
Yeah.
it's quite possible, particularly
It is.
statewide.
If there's a close race, it is.
And if anything pops up, will we have to conduct a special election?
We always ask for, we always put in our budget, every year we ask for a special election to be funded, and we ask for all the runoffs to be funded. Usually they will fund one of the runoffs. They never fund the special elections, and they just basically will fund those as needed if they come up. But I think, only funding 3 elections next year is a risk, considering how much because the elections now cost about 3 to 4 times as much with this voting system as they were with the old voting system. It just takes much more manpower, and there are lots of other supplies and things that go along with this that, especially with absentee, it costs much more to do elections now.
So I have a couple things, but I just want to make sure everybody else has had their chance. Okay. So on the budget, I appreciate the discussion. It's been a good one, and I think anything that we can do, particularly when we're speaking in the public, for people to understand the complexity of what goes on in every election, most of which is determined by laws that maybe we had a chance to affect, but, once it's in place, and that's what we have to do. One of the things I'd like to do for the upcoming session, but I don't know how on earth we're going to get that done, is to make some suggestions, back to Secretary of State's office about some amendments that may impact other counties as well, of just some tweaks to things that give us, real operational assistance. But that's another thing for another day. I do think for the general primary election runoff, we have to have funds in place for that, and it's too big a number to say we'll make an adjustment, down the line with something. There's always a little money you can play with, but $9-10 million is not something that you can just come up with. I think the other question I had was the software licensing renewals. I think that was $250,000, something like that, of software product that we have that we simply must pay the license renewals, or we lose the investment that we made in the software in the first place.
Yes, so for Dominion, it's a state from the Secretary of State. We have to pay for the renewal license for Dominion, and we have a new inventory system. That will be the first time we're going to pay. That will be next year, 2022. So I think that's all we have on the budget for.
And Brenda, on the inventory system, that did get put in, the inventory renewal did get put into the software licenses and renewals for next year, correct? Okay.
But not the Dominion?
The Dominion one of the 5, which is like around 500,000, that's not in there. And it's one of those things where we can send those as they, if we do have a piece of equipment breakdown, we can send that and pay for it as it is, rather than do the annual maintenance. For the extended warranty? Okay. The 500,000 was for extended warranty, okay.
Can we shut the external doors? The music is lovely, but it is a little bit of a distraction for hearing things. All right. So I think it's the BRA at some point. We probably just need to informally talk about how we might communicate, or y'all can just on your own initiative communicate with members of the Board of Commission that there are some budget items that just unfortunately are dictated by external forces that we really need to be in compliance with. And we have a very big election year coming. And so it's a balance. I've heard from election officials all over the country that, face the same issue, is you have elections that, the legislation of them are determined elsewhere, but local property tax owners, have to pay the freight. And we've underinvested, and so now there's new investment coming, and we simply don't have the leeway not to hold an election. That's the problem, is we can't not do some of the things that, in a normal department, you may forego to the next year, you may forego completely, but that is not an option that we have. So hopefully we can, help communicate some of the level of detail, and I appreciate all the questions that everybody has had to help clarify the position on these. Is there anything else to the operations report, questions or otherwise? Well, thank you very much for a very thorough report. I appreciate it. We have new business. We have a tentative board meeting schedule, which I don't believe is any different than how we've normally had our meetings. I have not gone and run this up against the Secretary of State's list of elections just to make sure the dates comply, but we can make adjustments as we go. Does anybody have any questions about the schedule or comments?
No.
All right, somebody want to make a motion that we accept this and approve the tentative board meeting schedule for 2022? Properly moved, seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. So, any opposed? There are none. It is adopted. Thank you. We're going to move to the residency challenge hearing. And everyone, please forgive me as I stumble through this. This is a new thing for me. And we have a few steps we have to go through to this. I know Mr. Ferguson is here, who's brought the challenge. Are there any voters here who were notified of the challenge that we need to take into consideration? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Ferguson, just hang on one second while I get myself together in this. Staff, if you could just give me a little advice about how we want to proceed with this. Do we want to have Mr. Ferguson present his challenge? Or is that going to begin on the staff side? How do we normally proceed with this? I've only presided over one, and it was withdrawn, so.
Yeah, the last, we can have, I guess the best thing to do would be to have Mr. Ferguson speak, and then we have a recommendation from the voter registration department on how to dispense with these based on what he submitted and what our research has been. I mean,
Okay. Mr. Ferguson, why don't I give you your 2 minutes now to tell us about your challenge, and if we have questions, we'd be happy to ask you those. Excuse me, 1 second. Will you turn that microphone on? Just push that button and then pull it up real close so we can hear you.
I think he isn't limited to two. I think he thinks he's limited to 2 minutes, but this isn't. That's not the case.
Okay, well, we'll just keep it. I think we know what we need to do.
Do this in 2 minutes. I don't talk that fast.
All right.
By the way, I'm a little hard of hearing. If you have a question, please speak up. I'm Earl Ferguson, I'm a registered voter in Fulton County, and I brought a voter challenge for 67 voters who are registered in Fulton County and have moved to North Carolina and have registered to vote in that state. Many of them have also voted there. About 80% of the let's see, about 80% of those that are up there have voted in North Carolina already. This is a section 21-2-229 challenge. It's different from the 230 series, which puts you into standby or inactive status. This removes you if it is successful from the voter's roll. It is new, as it came out of the last General Assembly session. I don't know if anybody else has presented one. It's new to me. The North Carolina list, I started with a list of the moved voters, change of address, national change of address list. It showed 109,000 people who are registered to vote in Georgia who had moved outside of their jurisdiction, including inside the state. There's no way we can deal with 109,000, so we looked at it and decided that what we would do is we would sort out all of the ones inside the state and concentrate on those that are moved. We also noted that some of them had birth dates and some did not. We sorted to eliminate those that did not have birth dates because it is important to be able to identify a voter you were challenging, and we did not want to lose that key item from it. So we wound up with 435 North Carolina voters. Now, as I mentioned, this for 67. We've started the process. It is not completed, but we wanted to do an initial submission to see how this was going to work and to work out procedures that are convenient for you folks, because I didn't want to have to burden the board with a special meeting, and we'll try to do it in conjunction with your regular meetings. Now, we've submitted a list of voters, 67 of them from the 435, and we have provided copies of their North Carolina registrations. They are all registered in North Carolina. If you are registered, if you move, you submit a change of address to the post office, but that doesn't affect your voter status. There's no system in place to remove voters. So you remain on the voter rolls. In the past, eventually you get what's called, I think, a 230 challenge, and that, if successful, puts you in the inactive status where you remain for a period of time, fairly lengthy period of time. The 229 process is much more expedient, and it eliminates this period where you are registered in 2 states. There's nothing wrong with the voter doing this. It's just that the system now has a voter on the rolls eligible to vote in the state of Georgia, in this case. And that state, and that voter is no longer here and is registered and voting in some other state. There's a possibility of voter fraud, and that's why this is such a concern. We have submitted a list of 67 with partial data there, not the complete file, from the movers NCOA file, change of address file. And we have also submitted copies of each and every one of those voters' registration for the state of North Carolina. We broke these up into groups of 15, got some volunteers to do the survey with the state and put that all together. I don't have all of those 400 and it wound up being 420 that we're surveying because we were able to eliminate a few. We don't have all of those done, so we chose a selection of challenges where we felt that the results that we had were completely valid. There were no questions. So I'm very confident in those, and I'm prepared to answer any questions at this point that you might have about what we did or about any particular voter challenge. And I have hard copies of all of the voter registrations that we've included. We sent this as an electronic, but I have copies of hard copies here, which we can pull out and discuss if necessary. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. We'll just start and see if any of the BRE members have questions.
My only,
Yep. And
Madam Chair.
would you pull that mic up real close so people can hear you?
Madam Chair, my only question,
Ms. Crawford, I might have trouble hearing you.
oh, sorry. My question is, on the information from Holly, the only voter not verified is Fred Bowen. Under the 41 number of electors?
Correct.
Okay, so Holly's saying that that has been verified, so he needs to stay on the rolls. Am I reading that right?
That's a staff question.
Am I-
Somebody from voter registration clarify that for us.
Am I reading that right?
Yes, ma'am. He will
Okay.
need to stay on because we were not able to verify that one elector.
Thank you.
May I respond to that one?
Sure.
Regarding Mr. Bowen, I was aware that he had requested it, so I've gone back and rechecked everything. I have copies of his voter registration form in North Carolina, and he has already voted in North Carolina in the last presidential election, last national election. And I checked also with through our my voter page, and he is still on the Georgia voter rolls. I see no reason for him to remain a legal voter in both states.
Do you, what isn't on this list that I can see are the birth dates of these folks that give us that verification that the name and the birth date coincides on those? Do we
If you're
have?
asking where to find him, he is in the very last of those sets of 15, and he's the first name.
I'm sorry, that wasn't my question.
Oh.
My question was, do you have corresponding birth dates that identify Fred Bowen as the Fred Bowen in North Carolina?
We have his date of birth off of the Georgia records. Now, when we submit to North Carolina, we submit the year of birth. And I've tested it. If I submit a year off, I do not get a response back. I did get a response back from the state of North Carolina with his registration form indicating that that is his birth year. We also, of course, check other things He happens to be a Fred Pasco Bowen II. And the second is on our Georgia records and is on the North Carolina records, which further verifies it. So the dates match, and the sequence of events where he submitted the change of address after he registered in Georgia, and the registration dates in North Carolina. And there's a couple of other ways that we check to make sure we're dealing with the same person.
Okay,
We are.
Thank you. Okay, just back to the staff. What was the reason that made this one stand out as not being validated?
We were not able to verify his information at the time.
Okay.
So I would just like to recommend that Mr. Ferguson could send that information to us, and then we will do the research.
Okay.
But for today, we would like to exclude him from the challenge.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, I withdraw his name from the challenge till we resolve this.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Great, thanks. Oh, Mr. Johnson.
Just for clarity, on this line that says election last voted, is that in North Carolina or in Georgia?
In Georgia.
So,
So
Like to
all of the
add one
voters
more-
on the list, the last time that they actually voted in Georgia was between the years of 2016 and 18.
no, this says 21.
I'd like to add one more point that I failed to make.
Could you just,
Well, hold on one
hold on
second,
one
sir.
second, we'll get back to it.
Because this goes from 16 to as
21.
recently as January 5th, 2021, November 20,
Right.
July, June 20. Because I'm also noticing some of them are in and around military bases. So are these residents of Georgia that may be at a military base?
Fayetteville, North Carolina, as you know, is a major military base, and we've noticed this also. And there have been some that have come and moved on, indicating they're probably members of military families. I'm retired military, I understand that. But you still can't be registered in two locations.
And I
But they
appreciate
need-
that, but I just want to make sure that of those two locations, Georgia is not their home base.
Right, because it has to be their original state.
So do we know the answer to that question? Because then if this line is they last voted in Georgia, then my question becomes, have they ever voted in North Carolina?
So, Mr. Johnson, in doing the research, what I found was, for example, if you look at the ones that you are referring to that voted this year in the January 5th election, they voted here in Georgia January 5th, but then when we looked them up and did the research, they registered in North Carolina, for example, on September 15th. So we may have to do some more detailed research, but if you voted here in January, it's possible they could have moved in September because, but we could do some more research to see if they have military designations in the system.
If you look for date registered in North Carolina, for example, the last one, which is Robert Charles Watson. He voted in the January election in 2021, but then he registered to vote in North Carolina in May of 2021. So all of those are all the registrations that they seem to be after the last election they voted on in Georgia.
Well, I just wanted to be clear that this line, I wasn't sure if that was a vote in Georgia or North Carolina, but you're saying it's a vote in Georgia.
Yes, sir.
So they voted in Georgia and then seemingly moved to North Carolina. And did we reached out to all of these people?
Yes, sir. We
And-
sent letters to all of the voters listed in the
I'm assuming none of
challenge.
these 66 replied.
Two, and they stated that they are North Carolina residents. So
Okay.
yes, sir. Those are the only two that touch bases with our office.
In the response.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Ferguson, you said there was a point you wanted to make.
All right. Before before we filed, we sent a copy of our challenges to the Secretary of State's office and asked them to check those and respond to us. I did not get their response back until late last week. Took me a couple of days to chew through it and understand it. I've sent a copy to you. However, it may not have gotten through the process, but it does divide all of my challenges up into 3 different groups, and I'd like to address those in general. The first group is those who are already listed as ineligible or listed as inactive voters, which means that the Secretary of State has already looked at their residential requirements and noted that they have moved, and so they sent them some correspondence, I think. I'm not sure exactly how this works, but eventually they are placed in a inactive status, which limits their ability to vote, but they're still on the rolls. We would submit that in addition to the fact that we have established these people have registered to vote in North Carolina, is a sufficient amount of data to remove them from the Georgia rolls. Now, that's the first of the 3 categories that the Secretary of State responded to us on. The second category is those who are currently being reviewed in NCOA for a change of address. And I called the Secretary of State to see where those were, and they are the paperwork is completed, and the notifications are in the process of being mailed out in the next batch. My opinion is that that doesn't change our challenge, but the fact that they have been investigated by the Secretary of State certainly enhances the credibility. Now, there's a third category where the Secretary of State merely responded to my list with 29 names of people that they had not done anything on yet. Now, bear in mind that what the Secretary of State's doing is a Section 230 challenge. I'm doing a 229 section. My challenge will remove them immediately, subject to any appeals they're able to make, whereas the 230 section allows them to stay online for years as inactive voters. So my contention is that we should remove them where it's possible.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay.
Well, just a statement that the registrar recommends that we remove them as well.
Yeah.
With the
One question
exception of-
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah. On this list that we have, there's a box around these names. Is that just somebody locked these names in, and or does it have some significance to the list?
No significance.
Okay, thank you. All right. Remind me again, I'm listening intently and having to listen to lovely music at the same time, and so my brain is not working. With the case of Mr. Bowen, are you recommending that we go ahead and remove him as well, or not?
He withdrew his name.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna reinvestigate that and deal with that at another time.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I withdraw Mr. Bowen's name from my list so that he can be brought back.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
One comment.
Mike got that, didn't it?
Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
For me, removing people from the rolls for whatever reason is always very important because it now creates a barrier. Now, understand that it seems as though these people have moved on, which is completely fine. I just want us as a staff or the staff to be sure that as these recommendations come forward, I understand the challenges. When they come, you have to address them. However, we just need to make absolute sure that these people, upon the recommendation, do all we can to make sure, as well as, if possible, notify these folks to let them know that they have been removed from our voter list.
And I would take that a step further in that notification letter. Let's just make sure we also give them instruction on how they can re-register if they feel like this was done in error or their situation has changed. Again, I'm a military brat. My dad's a retired Air Force officer. Voting is very, very important, and where you are registered relates more to what your home of record is, not where you actually live at any given point in time, and it gets complicated for military folks to chase that down. So appreciate your service, Mr. Ferguson, and know that I hold the military family in very high regard.
After 30 years, they sent me a letter that says, please go home and let somebody else have a turn.
My dad got that same letter, so we've had that fun. All right, so we are ready to move forward with this. One of the things I would just want to say that I appreciate is that you were thorough in your research, and also that you presented us with a relatively bite-sized morsel of a list to deal with. Couple concerns I have, because we've had a prior challenge that involved about 700 people that were not well documented, and it took a lot of time, and it was right in the middle of our election process, which is then a distraction for our staff. The Georgia law gives people the ability to make these challenges, and again, I appreciate the thoroughness with which you've gone about this. What I would like to request is a couple things. One, as you go through these processes, because it sounds like this is an ongoing project, that you do give some communication to members of the General Assembly and the Secretary of State of when this presents logistical difficulties, right? We have a 10-day period from the time you give us notification for us to set a meeting. That involves getting all of us together, have the staff have the time to thoroughly research the names, and sometimes they have other deadlines that they're required to meet that have nothing to do with this, and then getting a response back from the Secretary of State's office in a timely manner is very challenging, as you've come to find and as we've come to find. And I'm not complaining about them. It's the process that we're all under. And I've made some suggestions to the Secretary of State's office that we have some modification where these challenges start there, and you get your answer before we get notified to begin our process.
We're going to submit to the Secretary of State earlier. It took them about a month to get back to us with the response.
Right. And
as
so,
a result, I didn't have time to include it in the appeal.
correct. And so I think if there was some modification to the process, that it allowed our time frame not to begin until those answers are provided, it would give everybody a little more breathing room to get this done right.
I guarantee it will, any of them, and there will be more from me, but they will be treated that way. And we would like to establish a good working relationship with the board and the staff to make it convenient to reduce the workload on you.
Right. Well, we really appreciate that, because as you probably had to listen to the entire budget discussion, we don't have unlimited staff, and so this is a new requirement for us that requires attention. And so being mindful of our election schedule, as well as the volume of what's requested of us, is a
and I'm acutely aware how much time is involved in dealing with these. From personal, but then I've imposed that on your staff also.
correct. And they have requirements of other things that they have to do on a time schedule, so it makes everybody crazy.
So I'm on your side.
I know you are. So I just was trying to reemphasize the things that we think, that we really appreciate about how you've gone about this and that we hope can continue. All right, so can I have a motion, and we may need to get walked through this a little bit. Somebody like to take a stab at it?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I make a motion that we adopt the recommendations of the registrar in the course of Earl's challenges, which, as I look at it now, with the Fred Bowen being put to the side, we're looking to eliminate 66 voters from our voter registration database.
Okay, motion, the motion is to accept the challenge of 66 voters with the exception of Mr. Fred Bowen, which will be dealt with at a different time,
In accordance with the recommendations of the registrar.
in accordance with the recommendations of the registrar. Is there a second?
A second.
Properly moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? There are none. The motion is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, for the staff, if we could send just a perfunctory letter to these folks and just give them some indication of how they might rejoin the roles if they feel that they,
Yes, ma'am, and we will ensure that the board receives a copy of the correspondence as well.
thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. Appreciate everybody on that. We now move to the opportunity to go into executive session. I would like to see us do that. Would someone like to make a motion to,
I move that we go into executive session.
Okay.
Second.
For
personnel matter?
personnel matters.
Okay. Properly moved and seconded. I don't think we have litigation, just personnel. Okay. All those in favor of going into an executive session, and I believe we are going to stay in this room and ask everybody else to leave. I really apologize for that, but it's what we have this month. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. We are now going to move into executive session. We're going to take a 3 or 4 or 5 minute bio break for anybody who needs it before we start.
Here he is.
All right, hi, everybody. We're back from executive session. Thank you all so much for your patience. Thanks to the staff for hanging around. We do not have any other business to conduct today, so I would ask for a motion to adjourn, Mr. Johnson.
Do we have to do a motion to come out?
Oh, we have to, I'm so sorry.
Motion to come out of executive session?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. We're out of executive session now. We're back in the regular session. We have no further business to conduct. May I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, properly moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
He'll be here in a second.
Hey, Mark, I'm pushing it back to 10.